Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Maddie here, and today we're going to be doing our updated meta deck tier list for the second going into the third week of the Mega Rising format. Last week we did sort of our initial meta tier list where I ranked all of the decks really early on in the season. This isn't about like being right or wrong or sort of correcting mistakes. It's just that the metagame changes really dramatically with all of the new cards and everything that's going on in this new season. Things are just, developing really quickly. So today we're going to be updating that tier list, and I think that this is a good way to kind of do this without, having a super long video every week where we re-rank every deck. It just sort of makes sense to, take a look at our tier list as it was in the first week. That way you guys can see, the changes kind of in real time. So this is a little bit of a better way to do it. But before we get into it, guys, I want to say thank you for 40,000 subscribers. Absolutely insane. The support has been incredible. So I really, really appreciate that. Just completely crazy. I don't know how we got here to 40,000 subscribers. But anyway, lastly, before we get into the tier list, don't forget to go and register for the Pocket Mads Pocket Tournament number 8, Mega Madness. Going to be a lot of fun. We do not have a sponsor for this week's tournament. If anybody wants to donate to the prize pool, reach out to me on Discord. If not, we'll cover it here as a community. But we are in sort of, negotiation talks with our, our previous sponsor. So, but the tournament's still going on. There will be money in the prize pool. Go and register. Link down in the description below. Going to be a ton of fun. And again, we have still about 2 weeks or 2.5 weeks until, the rank season comes back. So, you might as well compete in something that is, competitive and fun for Pokemon Pocket. My hair's crazy today. Let's get right into it. Let's just dive right in. So again, this is the tier list of the last week. And, I would say a lot has changed. We actually have 4 sort of new decks here that I'm going to be adding to the tier list. But before we kind of go ahead and we move the decks around, what I am going to do is sort of just remove certain decks just completely off the tier list entirely. And the reason we do that is because, like, initially we had this D tier, but what I like to do is change the D tier to just like not meta tier. Because to be fair, if something is D tier, that just means somebody either isn't playing it or nobody's playing it, or it's just not a deck that's worth playing. So we're going to change the D tier to not meta tier. It's basically just sort of the graveyard for decks. So we're going to go ahead and just move a bunch of decks that are on this tier list down into that tier just because they're not seeing any play really whatsoever. And it is a little bit sad, but that's just the reality of the metagame. Things become condensed as time goes on. So the decks that we're going to be moving into this tier, well, we're going to be keeping Charizard Moltres into this tier because this is definitely not a deck that I think really anybody is choosing to play right now, and for good reason. The next deck that we're going to put down there is likely going to be, if we had to just check here and confirm, probably Giratina Darkrai. I know some people play it. It actually hasn't had a horrible win rate in the few people that have played it, but this just isn't really a deck that people are considering or playing right now in the current metagame. Lastly, this is going to be a little bit of a sad thing to do here, but Gyarados, I am actually just going to be putting into the not meta tier because this is a deck that some people have really tried to play, but very quickly is becoming a deck that nobody's really wanting to play. So I know there might be some people out there that are upset about that. I just don't know if Gyarados in its current iteration can really be considered meta, at least going into this week. Now, if something comes up and something happens and sort of a new version of Gyarados pops up, or, if the metagame changes so much that Gyarados becomes relevant, then it can kind of be upgraded from this tier. But for right now, this just is not a deck that we can really consider to be in the metagame, right? The other thing that I actually kind of want to do is put Pinsir in that tier as well. Pinsir saw a little bit of fringe play in that first week, but really ever since, it's just not a deck that anybody's really playing. I guess we could go ahead and like double check here because like if you give me a second, we can check to see how many people have played Pinsir or are playing Pinsir currently, like in the most recent tournaments, right? So one thing I will say is that like the Oricorio version of Pinsir, which was probably always the better way to play it, is definitely, not something that people are really choosing to play, which is pretty funny. I will say that if Pinsir is seeing some play, it's probably going to be the Leafeon version. So this version of Pinsir, we'll just also put it into the not meta tier. It just sort of popped up for a couple of days there, and it just sort of disappeared from play, if we're being honest. So yeah, we're gonna put Pinsir down here into the not meta tier. Everything else I think can stay. There might be some other decks that just stopped seeing play. I'm trying to put my finger on it. Honestly, like now that I'm checking, like Silvally Oricorio or Silvally Zeraora, this was a deck that actually was doing really well early on, but like I said, just really not seeing any play, which is just a little bit sad, I will say. So honestly, are we going to move Silvally off into the not meta tier? I mean, it just can't be on the tier list if nobody's playing it. So like, that's really what this is all about. So I'm actually going to move Silvally down here. And I'm also probably going to move like Altaria and Sylveon. I just think that most people are looking to play Altaria a different way. And if people are playing Sylveon or Espeon, they're playing it just sort of in its own archetype, or they're maybe pairing Sylveon with other Pokemon, just, you know, like in different archetypes. You know what I mean? So we're going to actually take Altaria, Sylveon. Not that these are really, really bad decks. They're just decks that people aren't playing. And if they're not playing, we can't rank them. That's just the reality of it, right? So for every deck that we move down here into the not meta tier, we kind of have like new decks that have, you know, either taken their spot or maybe will take their spot in the metagame. So anyway, there we go. There's all of the decks that we're not going to be covering. I guess we could also maybe talk about like Ampharos. Like Ampharos is an interesting one because I think that some people are kind of playing this really only one way now. I had this split between Ampharos and Pichu, or Pichu and Ampharos and Oricorio. These were sort of the two Ampharos archetypes that we had going into that first week. But honestly, I think there's really only one way that people are playing Ampharos, and that is with, you know, the non-EX Ampharos, and they're playing it like with Pichu and Oricorio most of the time. So we might actually just remove one of these from the tier list, just because I think there's really only one way to play Ampharos, right now at least. And I think that's probably fine. And I think that's good. I think that I think everything else in here is still seeing play. It is still actively, you know, participating in the metagame, which is definitely, you know, a good thing. But like I said, the metagame gets condensed, right? I mean, nobody's going to play something that's outside of like the top 15. It just doesn't really make sense unless it's sort of like a new deck that's really popped up and become really popular. So anyway, there it is. All of the decks being, you know, excluded from the rankings this week. And now let's start really from the top down, and then we'll just sort of put the deck in sort of its respective tier. So let's first of all talk about Altaria and Indeedee. So the thing with Altaria is that there's really just so many ways that people play it. It's really hard to categorize this particular deck. For me, I think that most decks are playing Altaria with Jirachi. I think that every Altaria deck is playing Jirachi, so I probably should have changed the image here. But we're going to categorize this as any Altaria deck that is playing one or at least two copies of Indeedee. And I think that this is probably still like a top deck. I would still consider Altaria with Indeedee, at least one copy of Indeedee, to be like a top tier deck in the game. I really do. It just has a lot going for it. You can still play Jirachi. You could still play Chingling. You just want to play Indeedee to kind of, you know, like boost up the healing and really kind of keep the sustain factor of Altaria really, really high. I compared Mega Altaria to like Circle Circuit Pikachu back in the day because I think it's kind of functioning in a very similar way, where this is a deck list that is just so strong and so consistent. It's always going to do what it wants to do. It's only two energies. Going second, Mega Altaria is terrifying because sometimes you're just going to start getting hit for 130 on your second turn over and over again. They have Jirachi to snipe the bench. They have Chingling to stall. They have Indeedee to also kind of stall and heal HP. So this deck really just has it all. I will say that I do still favor versions of this deck list with Indeedee than not. But I would say that like this version here, even though like the Indeedee decks also play Jirachi, this version of Altaria is going to be just like without Indeedee. And I think that Altaria is really split into like those two categories. Typically what we see though with the Indeedee version is that they're not playing Chingling. They're usually playing, sometimes they do, like it really is a mixed bag. You have Sableye, you have Indeedee, you have Jirachi, you have Chingling. Like those are all cards that you pair with Altaria. But I think that playing Altaria with Indeedee is the best way to play it. We're going to keep it S tier. Next up though, we have Greninja and Suicune EX. And to me, this is also still an S tier deck list. It went to grand finals this week, or this past weekend. It was actually the most heavily counterplayed deck. Like the entire metagame was shaped around beating this deck, and it still made it to grand finals and still had a pretty decent win rate. I think that this is fundamentally one of the strongest decks in the entire game, so we have to give it credit. And honestly, I feel very good about it. We're going to keep it S tier. Really nothing stands out to me about this deck list. Like even though, you know, its positioning maybe isn't as strong because like people understand it and people are countering it, it's still driving the metagame. This is definitely one of the top decks in the entire game. Next up, though, let's talk about Indeedee, or sorry, not Indeedee, but I'll make Altaria just without Indeedee. This deck to me is a little bit more volatile, and I still kind of want to keep it in the A tier. But in fact, I'm not even going to. Like this deck list, I'm probably just going to also put it S tier. We're going to put a lot of decks S tier this week because I think that we either put like basically no decks S tier or we put like a handful of decks in the S tier because I think that's how really spread out the metagame is right now. So yeah, I also think that Altaria, even without Indeedee, if you're kind of really diving into like the Chingling Jirachi package, it's still probably an S tier deck list. Like I would prefer Indeedee, but I still think that this version of Altaria, just because Altaria is so strong, Chingling itself is good. Like we can't sit sit here and say that it's not. I think that one deck here being Hydreigon is massively on the rise. So, you know, Altaria with Chinglings and Jirachis and Sableye still to me like an S tier deck. I kind of kept it A tier last week because I wasn't like as confident in it, but this week I 100% am very, very confident that this is a top deck in the game. And I think that it's just, you know, Altaria with or without Indeedee, because they are two very distinct different archetypes, are both S tier decks. So it's going to get promoted up here into the S tier. We're going to be less exclusive this week than we were last week. Next up is going to be Hydreigon and Absol. So shout out to Numa Tenale because he built, you know, Hydreigon and Absol deck with Chingling. And this to me, I think really broke open this archetype and made it absolutely broken. I think that Hydreigon, and I said this early on, we just maybe didn't know the best way to play it yet. The best players had to get their hands on the cards and really figure out the deck lists. Right now, I think that Hydreigon is potentially the #1 deck in the game. Like it's hard to justify it. Or it got, I think, top 4 at our last weekend's tournament, but the play rate for this deck has jumped dramatically. And I think that a lot of people are really on sort of the Hydreigon train. It's really funny because a lot of the most played decks, and if not the most played decks in the metagame right now, are both Absol decks, which is hilarious because Absol to me isn't really the core of these decks at all. It's either Hydreigon or Oricorio, and Absol is really just there to make the deck better in the late game. People wanted to, like, I've had some comments being like, are you going to admit that you were wrong about Absol? I made a video about this. Like literally like the second video I made this season was about Absol Oricorio. And because it was so strong into Blaziken, but I've sort of spoken my piece about Absol. Listen, I think every issue I had with the card was 100% true. I don't think I was wrong about my opinions about the card. It just so happens that the way that people are building deck lists kind of are catered and solve a lot of those issues that I kind of had with Absol, right? So the card is very limiting. It's really not like a super strong card, but it is incredibly valuable when paired in certain scenarios, right? And even the Hydreigon list, I think only plays like one Absol EX, so it's really not like the core of the deck. Hydreigon's broken. It is such a strong card. I mean, like you have the high roll potential of turn 2 130. You have Chingling stall. You have Mars. You have the Chingling copycat combo to get into Hydreigon is so strong. This is just a ridiculous deck list. One of my favorites in the entire game and inherently one of the best decks right now. I think that Chingling pairs really well in here and really has kind of elevated this deck above so many other decks in the game. So I'm going to be putting Hydreigon and Absol also S tier. To be fair, I don't know. These aren't really in order. I guess we'll just put it like right here. I'll put it like, yeah, I'm gonna put it like right here. It's really good. It's just so strong. Like this is such a good deck list. We're gonna definitely move it up to S tier right now, and it'll probably end up being one of the most played decks for sure. Next up though, we have Absol and Oricorio. This did win our tournament this past weekend, and you might think that that would sort of warrant an S tier placement, but the reality is that this deck list is not nearly as good as people think it is. It's definitely strong. It's definitely like an A tier deck. I think that this deck winning the tournament this weekend was not a fluke, but it really was like an interesting circumstances. And just because a deck gets first place doesn't mean that it's like the best deck in the game, right? So that's why I'm actually going to be keeping this deck A tier. I think that it's definitely at the forefront of the meta, so I'm a little bit less, or I'm a little bit more afraid of playing a deck like this because people are definitely looking to counterplay it. I think that the rise of Hydreigon definitely, you know, makes the Oricorio stuff maybe not as, you know, like dominant. It makes it a little bit more scary. I think that Suicune Greninja is still everywhere. A lot of different archetypes are kind of set up to deal with Mega Absol a lot better now. So this is still a strong deck list. Yes, it did get first place this past weekend, but I'm going to keep it right here at the top of A tier. In fact, my opinions about this deck really have not changed at all, even after it got first place. I still think this is just a very solid counter meta deck, inherently not that strong, but just will beat decks because it's Oricorio, and probably the best way to play Oricorio right now. Next is Luxray. Luxray has dipped in play dramatically, and I think a lot of people have just started, or I guess planned to play, or I guess maybe moved off of Luxray to play other versions of Oricorio decks. We have Absol Oricorio, and down here we have the new Magnezone Oricorio. And I really do think that Magnezone Oricorio is probably just a better version of Luxray Oricorio right now. You're not really reliant on Volkner, and it's effectively kind of the same deck list. I just think Magnezone's a better card than Luxray, even though you can hit the bench, which is really cool. This Luxray deck is definitely quality, but it really has dropped in play dramatically just because I think it's you know, because kind of been replaced heavily by the Magnezone version. And even though this is definitely better than like C tier, I'm actually going to move it to C tier just because nobody's really going to play this deck. Everyone's going to be playing Magnezone. So Luxray and Oricorio, it's going to go down to the C tier. Definitely sort of a niche counter meta pick, but not something that I would really consider over some other decks that are very similar to it in the meta right now. Next up is going to be Greninja Oricorio. Again, my opinions about this deck have not changed at all. I still think this is like a very, very solid, counter control, anti-meta deck list. And I think that it's actually very similar to Mega Absol. It's just not as like fancy or as fun because it doesn't play Absol. It doesn't play the new cards, but effectively this is like the same deck. Like, and you're playing Suicune, you're playing Greninjas. So you have, it's like a mix, right? You're playing Suicune Greninja, but you're playing Oricorio with it. Inherently, I think it does make the deck worse than just playing normal Suicune Greninja EX, but this is definitely not a bad deck list. And I think that it just inherently wins games. And there's some archetypes in the game that really just can't deal with Oricorio, Double Irida, Giant Capes, and then the Greninja pings. Like, it really is a little bit too much for some decks to kind of get over. So we're going to keep it A tier. I think A tier is definitely a fine placement here. I'm going to just put it at the bottom of A tier because I don't think it's that bad. Definitely not a popular deck at this point. Again, a lot of Oricorio versions are becoming more popular, but this is still a strong. This isn't even the first season we've been talking about it like this. There's so many different seasons where Greninja Oricorio just kind of sits around B or A tier, and like not many people play it, but it always has a high win rate. And I think that's where we're at. This is just a deck that it's just a very standard control deck that is going to win games. Next up is Poison Guzzlord. Yeah, I love Guzzlord right now. And again, it's a deck that just hasn't caught on. I've been trying to showcase it. I've been trying to talk about it. I think Guzzlord is very, very good right now. In fact, sort of the new wave is actually a lot of people playing Buzzwole. So both Ultra Beast decks, and we see Buzzwole here on the bottom here, will be added to the tier list. Both of these Ultra Beast decks are very, very good. I don't know really why. It's just sort of how it works out. I guess Guzzlord, we saw it in action. It's just really fast-paced and aggressive. And then Guzzlord can live attacks for Mega Pokemon. We still have the Grindcore cheese and Lucimeaning and hitting for 120 after Naganadel with all of the poison damage. It's enough to kind of get over the hump and KO Mega Pokemon. And I think that's definitely why Guzzlord is so strong. It really is kind of a Mega Pokemon, and it has a really strong package around it. I think that the Naganadel aggro poison package is really good in a meta right now with a lot of baby Pokemon, a lot of Oricorio, and then these Mega Pokemon that inherently just like when you KO them, the game's over, right? So being able to live an attack, hit for 120, finish off KOs, a really, really strong deck. I'm going to keep it A tier. Next up, let's talk about Ampharos. Sadly, I love Ampharos. This is not a bad deck. I think that people just right now maybe don't know the best way to play it. There hasn't been as much investment into really figuring out Ampharos, but to me, I'm still coping here. This is full copium. I really like Ampharos. I probably can't put it A tier because its performances this past weekend, but I think it does deserve a lot of credit, and it's definitely not a bad card. I just think that maybe I don't know. Maybe we just need the best players to play it, I guess. If you're watching this, Newman Tenale, the Frog EX players, the Magma players, all of the top players in the game, why don't we just play Ampharos this week and just try to give it a tournament win? You know what I mean? Do I have to put out a bounty? Maybe I got to put out a bounty. We'll see. But anyway, Ampharos, I'm going to put a B tier. I think that's probably a fair placement for Ampharos. I don't know. Maybe I think B tier is probably fine. I just like Ampharos, so maybe I'm coping a little bit, but I think B tier is probably fair. Next up is going to be Blaziken and Cleffa. So this was sort of the upgraded version of Blaziken that was able to deal with Oricorio a little bit better. To be fair, this deck list has been almost entirely replaced by a different version of Blaziken, which is going to be with Heatmor. And I think Heatmor is better than Cleffa. You could play Cleffa with Heatmor, but I think most people are just playing the Heatmor package. It just ends up being kind of the best way to play Blaziken right now. And I think that it's a really, really quality deck list. It could deal with Oricorio pretty well. And it just doesn't really have to. It's a great way to build Blaziken so that you don't lose to Oricorio, because even though Heatmor can't really, attack an Oricorio in the active spot, it doesn't care because you're just going to hit whatever's on the bench with Heatmor and then come into Blaziken and Cyrus it up and KO it. And then that's how we win games. And I honestly think that that's a pretty sound strategy, and it's just consistent. It's simple, very linear, but just very strong. I'm talking about Heatmor, this is. So the Cleffa version to me is kind of just completely fallen off the map. In fact, like if I'm being entirely honest with you, I might actually also move this down into the not meta tier. I just don't think people are really playing it. So because an archetype has effectively replaced the Cleffa version, we're going to go ahead, put it down into the not meta tier. Okay, this is the graveyard tier, unfortunately. So yeah, anyway, my bad. Peace out. Blaziken, Cleffa, hello, Heatmor, Blaziken. Definitely the better version, I would say, right now. But next up, let's talk about Decidueye, because last week, for some reason, I put Decidueye B tier, and I noticed that, but I guess it was a little bit too early. Decidueye definitely capitalized on the rise of Suicune Greninja, but also like Absol's everywhere. Decidueye is an absolutely broken deck. This is one of the best decks in the entire game. To me, it's one of those borderline S tier decks, but it's definitely maybe not S tier. Right now, it's sitting around the 5th or 6th most played deck at recent tournaments, but the win rate still very high. This is definitely a slept on deck. I think it's just because it's not playing any new cards or new Pokemon. It's just not going to be like that high on the play rate because everybody wants to play sort of the new deck. So we're going to go ahead and put Decidueye also A tier. I'm going to put it actually above Guzzlord. An absolutely incredible deck. I mean, this is literally one of the best decks in the entire game. It probably should see more play, but we had, I think, 3 or 4 Decidueye in top 16 last weekend. It really is a top dog right now. Not going to put it S tier just because it hasn't seen enough play, hasn't seen enough results, but the win rate is very impressive. It's got to go A tier to me. I mean, it's so good. I would heavily recommend that you just play Decidueye. Next up is going to be Mega Blaziken and Entei. Now, I like Blaziken Entei. I said time after time, again, that this is a very strong deck. It just struggles very heavily into, Absol Oricorio and likely other Oricorio decks as well. When you lead Entei, especially going first, you're just giving Oricorio decks like 3, 4, 5 turns to set up, and that just is not going to work out for you. You're probably going to end up losing the game. So we're going to put this deck probably still B tier. It's a very powerful deck list. Definitely one of the best, but it's very like single focused. Like this is a deck that just does one thing, and some decks can deal with it, some decks can't. So, for that reason, it's just not really flexible enough, but this is a really strong combo. If Oricorio didn't exist, this deck would likely just run the metagame because it's just so strong. So we're going to keep it B tier. I think B tier is a fine placement for this Blaziken deck. Spoiler, the Heatmor version will go higher than B tier. So that's what I'm feeling about Entei Blaziken, which again is still seeing play. It is sort of the other way that people are playing Blaziken instead of playing Heatmor right now. But Heatmor is definitely has taken over the most popular way to play Blaziken. Next up, let's talk about Suicune Greninja. And Suicune and Greninja here, to me, is also a dead deck. And this is crazy to me. But again, I think that most people have realized that the best way to play Suicune Greninja is going to be playing it with Greninja EX. So unfortunately, this is a deck list that has been replaced by a very similar deck that is inherently just better in most ways. So this is also a graveyard deck. We're putting it into the not meta tier. It's just not a deck that people are playing. And if people aren't playing it, we cannot put it on the tier list, unfortunately. So it's going to go down here into not meta. Shout out to all of these decks, by the way, which are all strong decks. It's just that nobody's playing them because there's better options. So kind of crazy, but that's the reality of the metagame as we go into the second and third week. It's just, if there's similar decks that are better, then people just aren't going to play them. You know what I mean? And that's kind of crazy, but that's just the reality of it. Next up, what do we have? We have Arceus. So Dark Arceus here. This is an interesting deck. Kind of another niche way that people are playing Arceus with like Crobat, the skill link of the Arceus link Crobat and Oricorio Pichu. So it's like Turbo Arceus, but also to like Oricorio, also Crobat for extra damage, which inherently is valuable in a metagame right now. Being able to hit for 130 plus, of course, the Crobat damage, maybe plus like a Giovanni or a Red if you're running it in the deck. You can 1 KO some Mega Pokemon or 2 KO Mega Pokemon. So I really do like this deck. I think that it's definitely solid. And some people are playing it. It's going to consistently have a pretty decent win rate. I feel good about it. I'm just going to keep it right here. I'm just going to keep it right here in the B tier. I think that B tier is a totally fine placement for this deck. I don't ever see it really rising in play and becoming like extraordinarily popular. But this is definitely not a bad deck whatsoever. So we're going to keep it B tier. I think B tier is a fine placement. Next up, we have Jolteon. Jolteon is really unfortunate for me because I love Jolteon and I think it's really cool. I just don't think this card is good enough or the metagame's not conducive enough for Jolteon. You got to understand this Pokemon here is really fun. If we had Jolteon maybe before Mega Pokemon came out, this card would be broken. But unfortunately, Jolteon is 140 HP stage 1 2 prize EX Pokemon. You're just going to get absolutely steamrolled by a lot of cards in the game right now. It's just not something that does enough. You know what I mean? The aggression, the fast-paced version of it is really cool, but what we see from time to time is that lightning decks just don't have enough oomph. A lot of the lightning Pokemon in the game are just not strong enough, and they're oftentimes reliant on Oricorio. And in fact, really the best lightning decks are decks that aren't even playing lightning. They're just actually just throwing Oricorio in, like Greninja Oricorio or Absol Oricorio. I do think that the best inherent lightning deck right now is Ampharos because it's just inherently strong, but even Ampharos kind of oftentimes plays Oricorio. Oricorio. So Jolteon to me, unfortunately, is going to stay C tier to me. This is just a quintessential C tier deck. Not bad, but just really not something I would consider playing. Pinsir, I also feel similarly about. I mean, I think that Pinsir's fine, but now with the kind of the new surgence like of Blaziken coming around, I don't feel safe playing Pinsir whatsoever, especially with Leafeon, which is the most played version of Pinsir. It likes to sit on the bench. It likes to get set up. Unfortunately, 150 is really good, but in the face of Mega Pokemon, it's just not really, it's not happening very well. Plus, like if Heatmor hits you once or twice, and then Blaziken comes in, Cyrus is up and KOs you, like we're not in a good spot. And Blaziken can kind of press the issue, right? So you used to be able to, with Pinsir, like be able to kind of just like go with Leafeon for a bit and then finish the game by coming into Pinsir and then maybe, you know, getting the first attack off on your opponent. But with Blaziken now being the fire type deck in the format, playing Heatmor and Cyrus, then oftentimes they can just bring Pinsir up and get the first attack on it. And that is literally a recipe for you to just lose the game. So there's other reasons why I don't really love Pinsir right now. It's not a bad card. Again, this is a deck that would be so good if other Mega Pokemon didn't exist, like Altaria, like Absol, like Blaziken. Like this is really, I guess Absol probably is a pretty good matchup for this deck list, but it also doesn't have a lot of great options to counter Oricorio, so the Oricorio matchups is a little bit awkward. But realistically, Altaria, Blaziken just beat Pinsir. They're just better versions of it. Pinsir would be so good if other Mega Pokemon didn't exist, and we were playing this in a format where, you know, it was still Giratina, Darkrai, and Suicune, Greninja, and Arceus and things like that, because we would just be one KOing. But unfortunately, we're not anymore. Pinsir going C tier, staying C tier, I should say. Definitely not a bad deck whatsoever. Next up, though, is actually going to be Hitmonchan Rampardos. I almost wanted to put this deck in the B tier because this is a real deck list. This is probably the best fighting deck in the game right now. And honestly, I kind of expected this to be like a full meme, but people are playing this, and this is not a bad deck whatsoever. It actually had a couple of placements in top 64. Like one player, I think, almost made top 16 at our tournament with Hitmonchan Rampardos. It's not a bad deck. It is still a deck in the metagame. I just can't consider it to be like a premier meta deck. So for that reason, we're going to go ahead and keep it C tier. But honestly, like this is not a bad deck either. Like it's honestly one of my favorite decks in the game. It's just inherently not that strong, which, you know, is unfortunate. And it's hard because we don't really have a lot of answers for Oricorio, right? Like we're playing a fighting deck, but we're reliant on like evolving into Rampardos to KO Oricorio. Or Granados, it just doesn't feel very good. But Hitmonchan's not a bad Pokemon. I would like to see Hitmonchan paired with like, you know, like an actual fighting Mega Pokemon. It's tough because we didn't get any fighting Megas, but if we get, you know, Mega Lucario or, you know, Mega Howlucha or something, like I think Hitmonchan could be good and fighting could be good. It's just right now they just haven't given us anything. So we're still stuck playing Rampardos, you know, in November of 2025, but that's the reality of fighting type in Pokemon Pocket. It's still a meta deck. It's just not a great one. It's going into the C tier. And that's every deck on the tier list. Now we're going to move down to the new inclusions for this week, because this is going to be probably an interesting part of the video, because these are new decks that really popped up over the last week. They just didn't really exist by the time we were making last week's tier list. So anyway, I guess they existed, but they just weren't seeing play, right? So like Buzzwole, let's talk about Buzzwole, because Buzzwole's like on the rise right now. Some people are playing it and it's doing pretty well. I can't really explain to you why that's the case. I think that Buzzwole actually does fairly well into a lot of the other top archetypes, things like Poison Guzzlord, things like, you know, Greninja Oricorio, Absol Oricorio, even Suicune Greninja to some extent, but probably not. But then of course Hydreigon, like these are all matchups that Buzzwole actually doesn't mind that much, which I think is pretty unique. Yes, you're going to get probably just steamrolled by things like Blaziken for sure, like that's definitely an issue, but Pheromosa, Buzzwole, like Lusamine, like for all of the same reasons kind of that Guzzlord is really strong, I think that Buzzwole's also strong. So I don't think it's as good as Guzzlord, but this is definitely not a bad deck. I'm actually going to be putting it B tier. I think that Buzzwole has the opportunity to be an actual participant in the metagame right now, and that actually excites me because I think that all of the extra dimensional Crisis decks, really these two, ended up being really good. ED Crisis is one of the best sets we've ever had. Guzzlord, Buzzwole, all of the Ultra Beasts, Silvally, like there's so many good Pokemon. Buzzwole to me, yeah, it's a B tier deck. I definitely don't think it's that bad. Now, Magnezone Oricorio. Magnezone Oricorio to me is not a bad deck list. To me, it kind of took the spot of, you know, Luxray Oricorio, and also a little bit of Greninja Oricorio. But what we're seeing right now is that the metagame is sort of changing, you know, like in a world where like the most played deck was Suicune Greninja, Magnezone definitely was not a bad choice. But that's not the future as we move forward into the metagame. It's going to be a lot of Hydreigon. It's going to be a lot of Blaziken, Heatmor. These are things that I don't really love matching up against if I'm playing Magnezone Oricorio. But that said, I still think it's an Oricorio deck, and Magnezone is uniquely pretty good in a Mega Pokemon, purely single prize archetype. You can slow the game down. You have access to Copycat, which definitely makes the deck a lot more consistent. I really like Magnezone, so I'm going to keep it. I'm probably going to put it B tier. I'm probably just going to put it like mid B tier. Definitely not a bad deck whatsoever, but I don't know if I can really give the A tier nod yet. We just need to see it maybe, you know, top a tournament. Maybe it already has, but the thing is, like, maybe its peak time in the metagame has already come and gone. So that's sort of how I feel about Magnezone. I could be not giving it enough credit. Maybe moving forward, it continues to be strong, but we're going to keep it right here, B tier. Definitely a solid deck in the metagame. Next up, though, is going to be Blaziken and Heatmor. This is where we have to really make a decision here, because I don't want to jump the gun and put Blaziken Heatmor S tier. You know, because it's like, is it really though? But it did do really well. It almost made it in 1 hour tournament this past weekend. I think that it really is kind of blazing through the metagame. No pun intended, just a really, really strong deck. I don't think it's S tier material yet, but I do really, when I take a look at this deck, I think, okay, you know, like when we put it alongside, you know, Absol, Oricorio, Decidueye, Guzzlord, like these are the matchups that I think are really a little bit more conducive to Blaziken Heatmor. And fun fact, I'm pretty sure Heatmor is the only like like 3 diamond or higher card out of any of the images on our tier list. I was noticing like the border on Heatmor. Every other card on the images on our tier list are like holo rare cards or EX and above rarity cards. So it's like, it's just unique. I don't know why I just mentioned that, but everything else here basically. Yeah, so that's kind of crazy. Anyway, that's a bit of a tangent. Heatmor, Blaziken, really, really good. I think it's like a high A tier deck right now. That's how I'm feeling about it. Maybe if it continues to really just like do well, if it just really proves itself over the next week, I might bump it up into S tier. But the decks in S tier have really just been dominant, like completely dominant since they came in, and they'll probably continue to be dominant because there's not really a great way to deal with these decks other than to just sort of hope you don't lose to them. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think that Blaziken Heatmor, I'm going to keep it A tier. I think that's probably a fair assessment. In fact, I'm going to put it top A tier. I am. In fact, I'm going to move Absol down. I'm going to put it like Absol mid A tier, and I'm going to put Blaziken and Decidueye at the top of A tier, which is kind of crazy. But yeah, that's how I'm feeling. I think Water's a little bit better than Fire, Grass, but Fire and Grass right now, really, really good choices currently. Next up, though, and lastly, we do have our man Goodra. Shout out to Goodra. I think that this is a deck that has a lot of potential. I just think that inherently, you know, maybe it's like not the best deck in the world. The funny thing about this deck, though, is that it's really not bad at all. It might be like a flavor of the week deck. Again, it didn't perform like exceedingly well, but not that many people played it either. So I'm going to be putting Goodra pretty confidently just like in the C tier. I'm going to put it just like, you know, I'll just put it C tier. It's definitely in the metagame, at least at the moment. Maybe it fades away and disappears forever. But for right now, I'm feeling pretty strongly about Goodra Indeedee as being like a real option in the metagame. You know what I mean? And by like a real option, I mean like something that you can play and confidently, like, you know, assume that, you know, you have the opportunity to at least win games, even though, you know, you'd probably rather play everything above it. Definitely not a bad deck. So yeah, that's kind of how I'm feeling. This is the tier list. This is my updated rankings right now. RIP to all of the decks in the not meta tier. There's just either very similar decks replacing them on the tier list above, or these are decks that people just aren't playing. So, you know, rest in peace to Genetic Apex Charizard, Giratina Darkrai, Silvally, even right now not seeing any play, Gyarados. Just these are decks that people aren't playing. You know what I mean? And that's just a little bit tough, but we can't rank them if they're not participating and they're not doing anything in the metagame. Yeah, S tier, these are the decks that are just really good. If I had to choose to play a deck right now, it would probably be S tier, or I think some of the A tier options are also really good, right? Like as we saw, you know, an A tier deck won our tournament, won the largest tournament. So anything in the A tier could definitely pop off and win a tournament. They're just not necessarily decks that when you look at the greater grand scheme of things, you would necessarily consider to be the top decks, right? If you don't look at placements and you look at, you know, play rate and win rate, like that's why these decks maybe can't be considered S tier, but they're all really, really, really good decks. I mean, like if Blaziken, Heatmor, Decidueye, Guzzlord, Absol, if these decks win tournaments, like I'm not surprised whatsoever. B tier, these are decks that are good. They just maybe, you know, there's better options, or just, you know, they aren't doing enough to really be like considered like top meta in my mind, but are definitely really solid. Also could win tournaments. I would just be maybe a little bit more surprised, right? If we saw like, you know, Entei Blaziken win a tournament right now, or Buzzwole or Ampharos Pichu, like if we saw these decks win tournaments, I'd be like, whoa, like that's crazy, you know? So that's why they're B tier. C tier, these are decks on the fringe. I mean, these are considered meta decks, but definitely struggling. That's why they're in the C tier. So that's the tier list, guys. Comment down below. What do you guys think? A shorter video today. I'm going to wrap it up here because it's about 30 minutes. But comment down below. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know if there's anything I should put on the tier list moving forward. Again, I kind of just go by whatever sort of, you know, getting momentum or seeing play, you know, at the moment. You know what I'm saying? So there it is, guys. Anyway, let's wrap it up. Thank you for 40,000 subscribers. Stay tuned. Don't forget to register for Pocket Meds Pocket Tournament number 8 this weekend. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm super excited. But yeah, there you go. There's the video. There's the tier list. All right, guys. Peace out. Have a good one. We'll see you guys later. Bye.